and Charles Eisenstein.
I don't think I'm going to say who I am. I think we should just start.
Shall we do that? So that kind of lets go of titles and preconceptions. Maybe if we just start with a conversation and see where it goes.
We just had an interesting experience coming here. We got lost. But we didn't only get lost geographically. We also got lost in a conversation that kind of wasn't going anywhere.
No. It went round in circles.
Yeah.
And I was getting very stressed.
Yeah.
And so was my GPS on my phone.
And it was interesting, like we were actually very close to our destination. But then we thought that we weren't. We thought that we were very far away.
Yeah.
But we were actually very close. And I'm just thinking about this metaphorically.
Yeah.
In a way, our society is very, very close to its destination. All of the solutions are here. We know all about regenerative agriculture, permaculture, green energy, toxic waste remediation, reforestation. We know how to relate to the ocean sustainably. We have all of the knowledge, but we're not applying any of it. Technologically, a more beautiful world is this close, but politically, it seems farther away than ever. And I guess our work, and probably the work of everybody in this room, if someone says, well, what's your real job? It's probably to serve this vision of what is so close and yet so far.
And I think that really also ties into why I found myself getting really stressed when we were physically and metaphorically going round in a circle in our conversation, was because I really cared when we were talking about mass damage and destruction, about ecocide. And that feeling of deep heartfelt caring, and that sense of sometimes, you know, when you get to a point of real desperation, but, you know, how do we stop? You were saying, yeah, but, you know, we're looking at everything's an ecocide. Deforestation, fracking, unconventional tar extraction, all our economies are based on ecocidal activity. You know, and Charles, you were saying to me, you mean to say that this is going to stop all of that and more, and then this, and then that? And you begin to think, yes, maybe this is completely mad. Maybe we can't stop it all. But you know, this is the thing. I remember someone saying to me, when people say that you're mad, then you know you're onto something good. And this is it. You know, we are onto something good. And those moments when you think you really are mad, you know, just pause for breath and say, good. Good. Madness can be a really good thing. We've defined madness wrongly, maybe here. I stick with it. Stick with the big ideas. Stick with the big dreams. You know, now more than ever, we need to think big, dream big, act big. The small steps aren't enough anymore. We have to go so much further.
Yeah, in a way, like anything that is kind of politically feasible isn't really worth doing. It's, you know, politically feasible to slow down deforestation, but it's not politically feasible to stop it completely. You know, I mean, what about the political realities of the mining interests and the petroleum interests? You know, the lumber companies. I mean, come on, you have to compromise, right? That's what's practical. The survival of the planet is not practical. So in a way, yeah, we've got to devote ourselves to the impractical and make it inevitable through our action. But on the other hand, like, sometimes I think that this focus, and this was one of the questions that just came up before a few minutes ago, like our focus on like the big stuff can be disempowering because, you know, you're just one person, one very small person, or one person no bigger than any other person. And if you're thinking like, okay, I've got to do something big, or it doesn't matter, then like, I mean, not everybody can do something big. In fact, most of our lives are very on a very local, interpersonal level. And sometimes I'll like run into someone who's maybe they're passionate about permaculture or something, and they love doing it, and they're in a relationship to a piece of land, and they're healing that land, and they're feeding people around them. But then there's part of them that says, but this isn't enough, because even if I have my beautiful permaculture farm, my organic gardens and my fruit trees, there's still Fukushima happening. There's still fracking happening. There's still tar sands removal. There's all of these things. There's war in the Middle East. There's genocide. There's ecocide. There's all of these things. The ocean is dying. The forests are dying. What does it matter what I'm doing? And the thing is, like, anybody could ask that. Even if you are campaigning for like a law of ecocide, like, even that is still a drop in the bucket compared to what really has to happen. And I think we have to have some other way to validate what we do besides the calculable, predictable macro effects. I'm conscious that I'm not speaking to English speakers here. A lot of the things that are most important to do, you can't justify them by this will change the world. So that permaculture guy I was talking about, he's like, but maybe if I write a book about it, then it'll be worthwhile. You know, maybe if I do it in a big way. But I think that like ignoring the thing that's right in front of our face in order to do the big thing, that's part of the problem. And the revolution that we're in right now isn't just the same mentality, the same kind of linear cause and effect thinking applied to a new objective, but it's a different way of approaching the world moment to moment.
You know, here's the thing. When I find myself examining a law of ecocide, and so I'm looking at a big global solution, a big law to criminalize mass damage and destruction, I realized that also I needed to examine the inner ecocide. What is it that I'm doing inside of me? What am I doing in my life that's causing damage and destruction? It's causing harm in my relationships, causing harm to my loved one. What is it that's playing out here that I need to address first and foremost in my life? And this is this mirroring thing as well, you know, what's happening in the micro playing out in the macro. That sense that we've got a world that's massively out of kilter here. With all that, the way we're driving our economies forward, the way we live our lives, but also how we as individuals, how does that translate back to here and now? And how also I'm aware that sometimes I'm stuck in a system that's so geared to going that way. It's really hard to step off it and see something completely different. You know, our normative is to stay within a framework that keeps us going 9 to 5 in a job because we've got to make money, because I've got a mortgage, I've got this to pay, there are children to go to school, How can I step off and do something different? And in a way, what I did 8 years ago when I found myself looking out of a window in court when I was waiting for my judges to come back. It was in the Royal Courts of Justice in London, the Court of Appeal. And I found myself looking out of the window and thinking it's not just my client that's been badly injured and harmed here, it's the earth that's been badly injured and harmed. And something needs to be done about that. and the earth is in need of a good lawyer, what I thought was I'd give myself a year off to work out what was needed. You know, here we have so many laws, so many environmental laws, so many international agreements. If you look at just international environmental agreements, there are over 500 of them, but they're not being adhered to. Or if there is any mechanism, it's a fine, what I call catch me if you can laws. Where are we going wrong? How can it be that all these laws are completely ineffectual? What is it that's creating a completely, it's commoditizing. A lot of it's commoditized based. So he who can pay out wins. There's a price on everything. If you want to destroy it, comes at a price, but you can still do it. So for me, this was about taking time out to see how do we fundamentally get away from that normative, that way of engaging with the world. And Charles, you talk about this. You know, this is about a closer examination of money. And a word actually I didn't really think about until when we were walking here this evening, just before we got lost. A word that I use often. How do we, you know, put in place something to make people accountable? Accountability. How do we hold to account those who are damaging and destroying the earth? And you said, well, that's accounting, that's money. It's coming back to this money narrative all over again.
Right, and even if you're talking about maybe prison terms for people who commit ecocide, yeah, it's still, when you say, we still use the word hold them to account. I don't know in Norwegian if you use such a concept.
You do.
So even if you're not talking about a financial fine, you're still talking about
penalty.
A penalty, right? Something that's playing into
penalization.
It's based on somebody's calculation of cost and benefit to themselves. And like maybe there's a role for that kind of coercion, but I don't think that the deepest change will come from deterrence and incentives. I think it comes from a change of heart where we realize that we don't want to commit ecocide. That's not who we really are, because we're falling in love with this planet. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to change our system of economic or legal incentives and punishments. But it's really more a matter of realigning economic and legal incentives so that they are aligned with who we really are, or who we're becoming, we could say. I use the word sacred in my book title, Sacred Economics, not because I'm saying that there's some external spiritual property, or some people think that I'm talking about sacred economics must be not about money, it must be about spirituality or something like that. But no, what I'm talking about is making money sacred in the sense that it's in alignment with what is sacred to us. And I think that as far as modern society goes, what's sacred to us is changing. 1 or 2 generations ago, what was sacred to us was progress, technological progress, and the conquest of nature. Today, you say the conquest of nature, and you sound like you're from the 1950s. You know, that's not something that people endorse today. But it used to be, yeah, the conquest of nature, you know, man triumphing over nature. It sounded great. And if you were an idealistic young person, you would want to contribute to that. You would want to become a nuclear scientist, you know, an engineer. You would, and society would glorify that. And today, we're still living in the institutions from that era. So our economic system still glorifies that, still incentivizes that. You can make a lot of money by conquering nature, by thinking of a way to get that oil out. But you can't make a lot of money by being an earth law advocate. Or did you do this just to get rich, Polly? So our money system is not aligned with what is becoming sacred to us. No longer growth, progress, conquest. But now what's becoming sacred to us is the health and beauty of this planet. That's what moves us. So this is what unifies our work. Well, there's more, but one thing that unifies our work is Polly saying, yeah, let's bring our legal, because our legal system is based in the past too. We were just talking about that today.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't even recognize ecocide as a crime because it doesn't recognize Earth as a subjective being that can suffer a tort, you know, that can suffer harm. Like, can you harm a rock? Can you harm this plastic cup? You know, to say that you could harm that must mean that it has some kind of selfhood, some kind of intelligence, some kind of consciousness. Well, we've lived for a long time in a story that says the planet Earth doesn't have any more selfness than this cup. It's just a bunch of, well, it's an iron nickel core, you know, and then there's the magma and the crust, and there's a scum of life, which is just this kind of chemical machine on top of it. And where's the selfhood? Where's the beingness? Where's the consciousness in that? There isn't one. So a legal system that doesn't recognize rights of Earth is totally natural when we live inside that story that says Earth, nature, and materiality is just a bunch of stuff, a bunch of generic particles, masses, forces, and that's it. But now that's changing, and we're understanding that this other outside of ourselves isn't just an other outside of ourselves, but it has the qualities that a self has. And as we recognize that, we're able to hold it sacred, just as we can hold another human being sacred, because you're not a commodity, you're a unique individual. So now we're seeing Earth that way too. So basically we have an obsolete legal system, because it's based on seeing Earth and the other as just an object, and we have an obsolete economic system, because it allows you to get rich from treating Earth as an other, but not to get rich by loving and protecting Earth. So that's what unifies our work. We're trying to bring law and economy, and actually I'm not that interested in economy anymore, but it's still something. But we're trying to bring these things now into alignment with what we care about.
And actually, you've just said something that really triggered a thought in me. One of the most ancient tenets in law that's been really forgotten about and kind of just, you know, shoved... Oh, is that me? Sorry. I won't move too far. Shoved underneath the table is called the sacred trust of civilization. And this is a very ancient tenet of law. The first written texts of this go back to the 16th century, but it's known that they went back at least 10 centuries before that. And the idea being that we as human beings hold in trust our land, our earth, on behalf of future generations, on behalf of the inhabitants of our earth. In fact, the word uses inhabitants, current and future. And this is now embedded in the United Nations Charter, but it's something that has been completely overlooked through the annals of time. It's been kind of marginalized to the point that nobody pays any attention to it. It's just some nice words now, because we're so stuck in this world of ownership and property and ascribing silent rights to corporations, the right to destroy, the right to kill. It's not written in law anywhere, but it's an ascribing of those rights. Once you start allowing companies to cause mass damage and destruction, then you're giving rights through the back door. And yet that's a completely the antithesis of what a sacred trust of civilization is all about. To see ourselves as trustees of planet Earth. To see ourselves as guardians, as stewards of this land, not owners, but here to ensure that what we leave is better than what we came in with. So it's not about destroying the earth, it's about actually putting back in. It is about the duty of care. The legal term is a legal duty of care. And that's a glorious duty to have. A wonderful, magical duty to see ourselves as trustees of planet Earth, of our home. You know, it is a home, really, our whole planet. So what we do with it, what we decide, how we engage with this life, this world, that duty, that great sense of care. And of course, care is really something that comes from the heart. It's a very different mindset altogether. You know, when you talk about what do you care about? What really makes you have a feeling of deep care in this world? It's not something you've bought, I'll wager. You know, if you were to lie in your bed tonight and think, what do I really care about? There's not going to be many things that have a massive price tag on them, because it's about the intrinsic values, isn't it? Rather than the imposed value. You're not going to say it's my yacht and my second house and the DVD and the flat screen. It's not. It's going to be people. It's going to be land. It's going to be your deep connection with the forest, with fjords, with, you know, kicking through leaves on a beautiful autumnal day, on, you know, seeing the sunrise on the snow and seeing it glistening. You know, these things that I deeply care about, I love. I don't know, kids laughing, being with friends, getting a bit drunk. Simple things, really.
I love how you're reaching back into the deep history of law in order to see what the future of law could be. What was that principle again?
Sacred trust
Sacred
of civilization.
Trust. And I guess I'm kind of doing, when I speak about economics, I'm doing the same thing, because the deep past of economics is gift culture. That's how all ancient economies worked. They were gift-based. And the principle of the gift, it wasn't just an economic principle, it was also a cosmological principle. People saw the world through eyes of gift. And actually, the sacred trust, the way that you formulated it, basically, it says that Earth, the land, and everything on it is a gift. That now today we don't really, in modern culture, we don't really understand gift. We kind of think gift is something you receive and then you keep it. But actually, in gift cultures, gifts are something you receive, and either you consume it or you pass it on. So in one way or another, it's consumed, either by giving it forward or by eating it, or using it up in some way. And Lewis Hyde, actually, there's a wonderful book, maybe some of you have read The Gift by Lewis Hyde. He describes the confusion that this caused when colonists came to North America, and the Native Americans gave them, you know, maybe a peace pipe, or gave them some ceremonial object to establish a friendship. And so the colonist gets it, oh, this will look nice in the British Museum, you know, I'll keep it on my mantelpiece, you know, and then the Native Americans, at some point, they're like, they would visit and they'd say, well, you know, aren't you ready to give that onward? And the colonist would be like, oh, you want it back, huh? Indian giver, that was the phrase, Indian giver. They didn't understand because they had already been alienated from gift culture. And we're almost totally alienated from it now. So when we say that the earth is a gift, it doesn't mean that it's now our property to use, abuse, and destroy. But what it means is that it's ours to hold until we're done with it and ready to give it onward. And I guess, I don't know, sometimes I talk to in my country, there's a lot of evangelical Christians, and they say, well, the Bible says that God gave earth to humanity, and that means we can do whatever we want with it. And I say, well, if you give a gift to somebody and they trash it, if you give a beautiful painting that you made yourself and they use it for toilet paper, how do you feel? You know, you feel insulted. And if we use earth that way, then we're insulting the giver by dishonoring the gift.
And for me, this really picks up on a theme, a thread that runs through everything that I'm doing. This idea of creating an overriding principle of first do no harm. When I use that principle of first do no harm, then whatever decision I make out of that will flow to a place that's, instead of it being destructive, becomes constructive. Instead of it being competitive, becomes collaborative. Instead of it being from a place of fear of lack, it comes from a place of trust, of abundance. And so it seems to me that I feel that we've lost sight of maybe some key fundamental principles, universal wisdom. And sometimes something is so simple to understand that it doesn't need great complexity to explain it. First, do no harm. You know, it makes sense. It's common sense. We're talking about wisdom here. And it's unifying. It transcends religions, belief systems. You can be a humanist or a Buddhist or an atheist or a spiritualist. You'd get at that fundamental principle. So I think there are certain universal principles that will assist us to get to a more beautiful world that our hearts knows is possible. And I talk about principle as opposed to law, written law. Now, here I am advocating a written law, an international law of ecocide, to make it illegal to cause mass damage and destruction, to put in place a legal duty of care. But maybe even putting in a law is not what this is about. You know, it's that thing of there's a bigger picture here at play. You know, how do we govern our lives? How do we engage with life itself? For me, life is sacred. So if life is sacred, then it seems anathema to me that I would want to, A, myself cause harm, but also remain complicit in a system that continues to cause harm. So it becomes incumbent upon me to stand up and speak out. I can't, in all conscience, sit back and say, oh, well, you know, hey, there's not much I can do. Well, there is. Each voice counts here. And it seems to me that, you know, almost the system we're in is pushing us down to believe that our voice doesn't count. What we say and what we do doesn't count, but it does. Actually, every time we do stand up and speak out, it's ripples, you know, a ripple effect. And we were talking about this earlier, that, you know, if you're no longer buying into that Cartesian way of engaging with life, where cause and effect are like a straight line, when you're actually working from a place of trust, then you don't really know where those ripples will end up. But the thing is, you know that you're contributing to more and more ripples. You know, and very soon it becomes a tsunami of thought, of belief, of engagement in a different way of being and doing, that understands that greater freedom is to be found in just maybe putting in place a few core principles. And then you don't really need much written law at all, actually. We probably get rid of health and safety altogether. Just work from one fundamental principle.
So this actually is starting to get at a question that someone brought up right before, which is, how do you stay motivated as an activist when it so often looks like your efforts are having no results whatsoever, or very tiny results? So I want to ask a very provocative question about do no harm. Why? Why should you not do any harm? Who cares? What's in it for you to do no harm? Is there a selfish reason to do no harm, or is this some principle that you have to live by, and then if you live by it, then Charles Eisenstein and Polly Higgins think you're a good person, and you get to think you're a good person, and you get to escape guilt. But suppose you're a psychopath. Suppose you don't give a shit about what Charles or Polly or anybody thinks, and you don't care about guilt. Is there any other reason to do no harm? Or is this some kind of spiritual principle that is in opposition to what the flesh wants? And I think that we live in a delusion that we have to somehow sacrifice our own well-being in order to be altruistic. I mean, the word altruism already kind of implies that you're being self-sacrificing. When evolutionary biologists talk about altruism, they're like, why would an organism sacrifice its own genetic interest for the sake of other beings? Well, we have to explain that somehow and show that it's not really a sacrifice. So when we live in a world view of separation, then what you do to another, harm, for example, that person's separate from you, so you're not harming yourself. But what if we asked, well, why should I do no harm to my own finger? You know, it's not me, it's just my finger, so I might as well burn it. Well, that's stupid, because the finger is part of me. But we see the Albertan boreal forests where the tar sands are, maybe not people in this room, but in general, our society sees that as not part of self. That's just some trees out there. Or that's, you know, whatever. The fracking, it's just the water, it's just other people in other countries, it's not me. But now we're learning that everything that we do to the planet, we are doing to ourselves. Even in Norway, where it seems that we're very well insulated from the traumas of the world, they still sneak back underneath the defenses. And like that gunman who shot 72 people a few years ago, that was in Norway, right? Like, it's like the violence of the world always gets into your fortress, or through suicide and depression and the feeling of loneliness that every modern society has. The autoimmune diseases, which are increasing in every modern country, it's coming back to us. And we have a feeling that this is just the beginning. We can't keep the problems of the world out for much longer inside our fortress. And so we're beginning to understand that do no harm, it's not just kind of an ethical principle, but it's a matter of self-interest too. Do no harm to the other, because the other isn't really an other. And anything I do to the other, I'm doing to myself. Now so that's basically, we see that as a spiritual teaching. And in our culture, it is a spiritual teaching that seems to contradict economic reality. Because in the modern economy, if something bad happens to you, if harm happens to you, that's good for me, because that's one less competitor. Maybe we're competing for the same job. But in a gift economy, it's the opposite. Because in a gift economy, if you have more than you need, you share with somebody who has less. You don't accumulate things. The gift moves. So your good fortune is my good fortune too, because you'll have more to give. Your bad fortune is my bad fortune, because you'll have less to give. So economic reality in those societies reflects this spiritual principle. And this is all, in my view, like everything that we're doing is coming from a new and ancient understanding of who we are as not separate beings, not separate from each other, not separate from nature. And and we just want to bring our laws and economy into alignment with that. And when hopefully I'm not going too long here, but when we live from that understanding, there's no such thing as burnout. Because, like these ripples Polly was talking about, we don't know how they're going to ripple out into the universe. We don't know what the effect could be, but somehow, but we know that there has to be one. and we're guided by our feeling of being in service to something beyond ourselves. And I often give the example of this. I mentioned it in my book. This guy, Kalle Lasson, he's the publisher of Adbusters magazine. Mm-hmm. It's a very radical political magazine. Like no one can say that this guy is passive. You know, he's a hands-on activist. But when I met him a year or two ago, he said, you know, I'm not doing any activism right now, and I'm not very much involved with the magazine because I'm spending most of my time taking care of my 95-year-old mother-in-law. She's the mother of my deceased ex-wife. So it's not even, he has no legal duty to take care of her at all. It's just, he cares about her. And every day he's spending all of his time taking care of this old woman and not even telling anyone about it. It was just a private conversation. And I asked him if I could tell the story, and he said yes. But the logical mind of separation says, how could this be changing the world? He's wasting his time. He could be out there in the political realm, making big changes happen, doing big things. But instead, he's, changing the bedpan of a 95-year-old woman and not even inspiring people with the story. But he said to me that this is more important to me, and it feels more important and feels more significant than any of the political work I've done in the last 40 years. And I said, we have to live in a universe in which your feeling is accurate. I refuse to live in a world in which what he's doing doesn't matter. When we live by that, then it doesn't matter if we can predict how our actions of care change the big picture. It doesn't matter, because we're not acting from a desire, really. That's not the goal, to change the big picture. The goal is to serve what we care about. And I'm not saying that we should therefore not engage in the big picture, but I'm saying that feeling of care is what sustains us no matter what we're doing. And that's what makes us feel alive. And maybe some part of your life it's big things and some part it's little things, and just trust that feeling of care and you won't be burned out.
Yeah. Yeah. Charles, in your book that's just come out, The More Beautiful World That Our Heart Knows Is Possible, you mentioned that you had been bullied at school. And this really resonated with me because I had been bullied at school as well. And I think this also ties up with just what you've been talking about a little bit, because for me, what happened was I was very badly bullied at one school. I then changed schools and I saw a young boy in the school being very badly bullied. In fact, it was in the art class. The art class was an L shape. And all the younger kids were in the big part, and then the older kids were in the smaller part. So there were 8 of us, aged 16, round the corner, but there were about 30 11-year-olds who, before the art teacher would come up, would run around and be screaming and shouting, and it was, mayhem. And the teacher would sometimes sneak into the room, and how he would exert control over these younger children was he'd grab one of them and say, okay, stand on the table with one leg up. But if you put your leg down, I get to punch you really hard up against the wall. Bang. And he did this. And I was truly shocked to see this. I had just come from an all-girls school where I'd been bullied to an all-boys school where, in fact, bullying wasn't even happening in the margins. It was just the normative. This was how control was exerted on all children. It was violence, it was bullying, it was a way of exerting control. And so one day this happened. A little boy was put up on the table, had to keep his leg up. And of course, after a little while, his leg dropped down. He couldn't do it. It's very hard to do. So he had this little boy up against the wall, and he was going to punch him. And I could see he was wearing shorts. I could see the pee running down the inside leg of this little boy. He was so terrified that he wet himself. So I decided to disrupt this in the only way I could think possible, so I punched the teacher instead. Half an hour later, I was outside the school gates. And he was in hospital. Well, I don't know if you should clap. I have to say, meeting violence with violence is not necessarily a solution. But this was not a man I was able to have a conversation with and say, look, do you have an anger issue here with children? That was not going to work. And I don't think I wouldn't even know how to start. But the thing was, I really cared. I knew how that little kid felt. You know, it was an extension of me that he was being put in a position of, you know, real harm, but also a complete undervaluing, because he was, you know, a kid. Who was he? Well, you're expendable. I can basically pulp you to an inch of your life, and nobody will hold that teacher to account. So in a way, it's no surprise, I suppose, I ended up becoming a barrister, learning instead of using fists, I'd use words. But that strong vein of what I perceived to be an injustice, you know, and finding it impossible to stand back and say, well, you know, it's someone else's problem. Because actually that's what all my other school friends were doing. In fact, I was ostracized for standing up and doing that. The headmaster wouldn't listen to me. My parents were ashamed of me. I'd brought shame on the family. I lost all my friends that I had at that school overnight. I wasn't allowed back. And for years, I festered with deep upset and anger and resentment that nobody had heard me or was even willing to hear my side of the story. And there was no understanding here. In fact, what I didn't realize at the time, a number of things, but what I had done had acted as a huge disruptor of a pattern of harm that was playing out every single day. It was a normative in that school to allow violence to play out in this way. And that school now today has mentoring systems. You know, I mean, violence would be unheard of in this way. They have a strong anti-bullying policy and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, it's a very different world, completely different world now. But what I hadn't realized was at the time was that a year before in Scotland, where I'm from, the use of the leather belt had just been banned. So a law had been brought in to say you can no longer use the leather belt. So suddenly all these teachers who were very used to absolutely whipping everyone with the leather belt knew that this was illegal. But what do you do instead? Well, but there was no pathway to say to them using violence per se is a problem. So if we don't have a leather belt, I'll use my fists instead. So there was no help given to say, actually, there's another way of engaging with children. There's another way of doing this. And now I realise, looking back, that that art teacher was probably having a nervous breakdown. He just didn't know how to control, how to deal with this, how to deal with children. But I went to a completely different school after that. My parents gave up on me and they said, okay, we send you to the local comprehensive school up the road in the countryside, where it was run by a young headmaster who was an artist on the side, and incredible freedom, incredible trust. You know, he'd come in and nick cigarettes from us and ask us what we'd read in the newspapers at the weekend. So we were treated like human beings. And as a result, everyone flourished because there was a trust there and a care. You know, we knew he cared. We knew that all the teachers in the school cared. And so there was so much more greater freedom in that trust. In fact, there was no desire to kind of dog off school and do things, because actually it was really good fun going to school. So it was a completely different system based on trust and care. And for me, this has incredible parallels with what's playing out today. What I'm saying is that here we have a cycle of harm, of damage and destruction, which is leading to, amongst other things, I'm not really keen on the word resource, but resource depletion, which leads to conflict, which leads to war, which leads to more damage and destruction. So where's the disruptor? Where's the Red Knight? In British mythology, you have a King Arthur in the Round Table, and the great knights would go out and do daring-do feats, and actually they very rarely killed anyone. But on one occasion they had to. They had to take out the Red Knight, because what he was doing was so destructive for the community as a whole that there was no option but to do the kind of figurative, punch the teacher instead. Now, I'm not advocating we should be punching people, not at all. But sometimes it's finding the disruptors, disrupting the narrative that's going on here, the greater narrative of civilization today. And this is what I think, Charles, you're really doing, is it's a different conversation, it's a different engagement. This is why I'm very interested in trusteeship law. The whole idea of the sacred trust of civilization, the duty of care, what that means. That's a different type of legal language, which is about the greater good, not just here and now, but future generations. I'm looking 2,000 years hence. I think big. I want to see a far better place play out now from what I do here, that will have good implications for many thousands of years on. Rather than, actually, I just need to address the bottom line and make sure that we get good profits in, and growth is everything, and hey, drill, baby, drill, and we're going to make lots of money out of that, and that's going to be really good for our annual return, quarterly return. So this is in law, it has direct parallels. What kind of laws do we use? Do we property and ownership laws? What's that? That's very much about ownership. I own. So what's in it for me? And property and ownership is also really very much a driver of business today. Who has the rights over that land to go in and exploit it? Or is it about trusteeship laws, guardianship, stewardship?
Polly, maybe in a minute we should have questions and things like that. But I do want to respond to just the theme of bullying and fighting. I think that there probably is a time in life, in the many situations that arise in the human drama, for a fight. But we tend to apply the tactic of fighting to almost everything, especially in political culture. It's a campaign for this, a fight against that. A battle against something else. We use pressure and all kinds of force to win our objectives. I've noticed that every action movie and most children's movies have the same plot, which is that a deranged, inexplicably evil person is causing all kinds of problems, or an evil lion in The Lion King, or the evil general in Avatar, or whatever it is, in almost any movie, the evil car in Cars, And the solution to the problem is that you utterly defeat and overpower and destroy this evil being, and then the problem is solved. And I notice that we apply that assumption, we apply that understanding of the world in the political realm. And not understanding, we think that people who do evil things do them because they're evil people. But actually, when you get to know somebody personally doing evil things, it can be quite a shock to find out that they're a perfectly nice person. And you begin to suspect that if you were in their situation, you would do the same things that they do. The totality of their situation. In fact, it sometimes happens. I had a student who was, she was working as a cashier at a supermarket and, checking people out. The cashier, you pay the person, you pay them and have a nice day. And she had a supervisor who she hated. What a bitch, she said. She would come around and inspect her to make sure that she was saying, thank you, have a nice day, and saying it with a smile, and the smile had to look real. And she was like always on her case. And she hated this woman and thought, what a horrible person, But then she got promoted, and she was the supervisor now. And she found herself doing the same things that this other woman had been doing, because it was basically written into the job description. And if you find yourself as a corporate executive, you're going to find yourself doing things and thinking in ways that are part of that job description. And it's not just the job description, it's probably your whole upbringing in society, your whole education, maybe even your genetics, maybe even your astrological chart. And you get the sense that if I were you, I would do as you do. So then the question then becomes, if these people doing terrible things are not, it's not because they're terrible people, but it's because of their conditions. Then the activist, the change agent, begins to say, how can I change those conditions? How can I change the story that they live in which fracking is creating energy independence and it's better than oil and we're doing the planet good? How can you change whatever story that they're living in? I mean, everybody thinks that they're the good guy. So how do you change that story? And how do you change somebody's worldview that's based on fear and control? That's where bullying comes from. It's based on fear and control. How do you change that? And so this brings up the issue of disrupting the story. And there are many levels that you can disrupt the story at. You can disrupt the story that we call business as usual. You can disrupt the story that says no one's really suffering by showing how suffering is happening. A law of ecocide disrupts the story in a very profound way. It disrupts the whole legal system that says it's okay to do these things. The legal system is a story. It's just a system of agreements and narratives. You can also disrupt the story on a personal level by giving somebody an experience that doesn't fit into the worldview of fear and control. An experience of generosity, of unconditional acceptance, of love, of forgiveness. These make people less afraid. And I think that these are political acts because they change the foundation on which our system is built. It's a foundation of separation, fear, and control. Because, sometimes I want to beat up the bullies, I want to take that leather belt to the people who are using the leather belt. But then really what I'm doing is I'm strengthening that field of punishment and control. And it might bring superficial results sometimes, but it's not a deep enough revolution.
Yeah. Let's take questions. Questions? Yeah. No, gentleman over there with the light top. Yeah. I'm going to ask, can we do male, female, male, female? Because I notice often men are so much more comfortable in speaking. So I want to actively encourage women to have that space to ask questions and speak as well. So So.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming here and for sharing your stories, or the stories you're sharing. And I'm wondering about anthropomorphization, like painting a smiley on the sun, being able to identify with the sun, making it into a self, being able to tell a story about the sun as if it was yourself, and all of a sudden drawing conclusions from what the sun does and making them fit with your own life and acting upon it, for example. Or the same thing with a company. Like a deeper evolution as an aspect of it I could see it would be to change what motivates corporations and the structures that they hold. So like instead of it being profit solely to a disconnected group of people that are apart from several other peoples that are apart from each other but are more congregated whole that create the value or distribute the value that the corporation holds. Do you have any other suggestions for how a corporation or a gathering of people could share and create value?
Okay, so there's two questions there. I think maybe I'll answer the first and Polly can do the second. So anthropomorphic projection. I talked about that last night too. So yeah, like the child looks at the sun and knows that the sun is a being and has a personal relationship with that being, and knows that the tree can hear when he talks to the tree, and knows that the world outside himself is alive. And then we grow up and we say, no, that was just an anthropomorphic projection. The sun, actually, it's just a ball of fusing hydrogen gas. The tree is, woody tissue maintaining certain chemical homeostasis, and so on and so forth. And matter does not have the properties of self. Now, this is an almost universally held scientific doctrine, but it is not what most human beings who lived on this planet believed. Most indigenous, probably as far as I know, all indigenous cultures saw sentience, selfhood, even consciousness or intelligence as being possessed not only by all living beings, but also by systems and inanimate objects, mountains, rocks, the wind, clouds, and so forth. So one thing I wonder is, is this yet another realm in which we know better than the natives, than the savages, than the primitive people? We know how the world works and they don't. Well, look at the results. Like, is our knowledge of how the world works, is it working for us? What kind of results is it creating? Also, there is a breakdown underway in the scientific paradigms that don't ascribe to nature and to other beings the properties of self. And I've kind of made a study of a lot of excluded scientific paradigms and excluded theories and excluded phenomena. What do they have in common? Things like Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic fields, for example. That theory basically says that there's an intelligence in this universe that is not merely our projection. Or the theory of water memory that says water is a solvent not just of materials but of information and energy too, and therefore that each drop of water is unique because it has a unique history and has been under unique influences. It's a unique individual and not just a generic substance. The phenomenon of crop circles, which seems to show that there's an intelligence that's not and beauty that's happening that's not of human design, but also even within scientific orthodoxy. And this gets to the second part of your question a little bit. Emergent phenomena like is to say, well, a corporation has desires, is that just an anthropomorphic projection? Or have you ever been in an organization where the organization seems to have a mind of its own, and the organization makes choices that not a single member actually agrees with? Like, that happens in every organization I've ever been in. It's like it has a mind of its own. So yeah, emergence and complexity. You know, you have self-emergent structures, and of course quantum mechanics, where an electron going through a slit, you know, this electron goes there, and the next one goes there, and the next one goes somewhere else, and it doesn't make sense in deterministic physics. So you have to say, well, it's random or it's acausal. But you ask an indigenous person what's happening, and he says, of course, it's obvious. Each one is a unique individual, so this one chooses this path, and that one chooses that path, because the universe is intelligent through and through, down to every particle. So,
So how do you change that culture in corporations? Well, here's the thing. When I was practicing as a court lawyer, as a barrister in London, I was a corporate lawyer. I wasn't an environmental lawyer. So I came from the world of representing CEOs and directors of big transnational corporations or their employees. And I found myself thinking, how is it that, you know, people I get on really well with, good people, seem to think it's completely normal to make lots and lots of money out of something that's causing mass damage and destruction? How have we so normalized this? And to a point that we don't question it, we don't want to look at the destructiveness of it. And this was in part, you know, led me to a point of, it was about going into the rabbit hole, you know, digging into that rabbit hole, going down there, taking an avenue of deeper and deeper inquiry and asking questions that I didn't have the answer to. And they're the best questions of all. You know, there's no point asking questions you know the answer to, and everyone else knows the answer to. Ask the questions you don't know the answer to, because they're the ones that are worthwhile pursuing. And that led me to asking, how do we create a duty of care for the earth? How do we do this? That supersedes what's playing out here, that becomes an overriding principle over and above everything else. And that's what led to a law of ecocide. Amongst there are other laws. The whole concept of a universal declaration of rights of the earth, that's part of it as well. Rights on their own aren't enough, because this is the thing, a corporation does have rights. It's what's known in law as the artificial personhood. And that's quite correct. It is an artificial personhood because it's a piece of paper, actually. It's its charter or articles of association. But because it's a piece of paper, you can't ascribe duties and obligations. There's no point locking up a piece of paper. No. It doesn't have duties and obligations, but you can impose rights, and if they're breached, well, yes, you can fine. But there's not much else you can do, so it's very limited in what you can do here. And that's why I ended up coming to a point of recognition that we really do need an international law of ecocide here. But to pick up on the quantum physics aspect of this, because when you look at those atoms when they move, they change direction. There's something about this randomness that happens, and there's been scientific experiments that show that if you have atoms bouncing off in different directions, if you actually take the time to look at them, they start to converge. And this is this thing about shining a light, giving name to something and identifying it for what it is. And I was given fantastic indigenous wisdom from a friend of mine. Only when we look at the shadow self and give it name can the healing begin. And for me, in a way, this is what a law of ecocide is about. It's looking at the shadow self, it's looking at the mass damage and destruction, giving it name, and allowing the healing to begin, allowing the whole narrative to emerge around restorative justice in a very big way. How do we put back into the earth? It's not a matter of just walking away from land that's been vastly desecrated. I've seen this up in Alaska, flying over oil fields there, and I've also experienced the Athabasca tar sands. But to fly over oil fields and to see abandoned land that's been sucked dry, quite literally, and just left abandoned and completely destroyed, it needs help. There's a healing that needs to happen there. You know, that is a wanton breach of our duties and obligations.
Yeah, you say first do no harm, but that's just first.
Actually, that's a very good point. First, starting point is do no harm. And then after that, where do you go? And that's where the healing comes in. That's where, you know, we don't just walk away from, well, we've destroyed over there, so we'll just go over here now. There's actually the putting back. That's about valuing the marginal, you know, the land that's been abandoned, putting care and love back into it.
I'm sorry to, I'll pass this on right in a moment, but like, where do you draw the line between, hey, your butterfly effect is screwing up my life kind of thing, like, harm only comes to a conscious or sentient individual or something, but that's because we define whatever we're talking about as a sentient and individual. It can still be harm if I'm causing the environment to destroy your environment, that you require certain aspects of it to survive. If I destroy them, like your water supply, then I'm causing you harm indirectly.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is already recognised in law with private nuisance cases and tort. So, you know, you own the land here upstream, and you decide that you're going to do something that's very polluting, and you pour it into your water, and it comes downstream into Charles's garden. Then you can take action against me for polluting here because it causes damage there. So that's a well recognised precept of law. You know, if you're doing a bit there that has adverse impact there. What I'm really saying is that on a big scale, we're playing out massively here. Cause mass damage and destruction in the tar sands. Actually, that has huge adverse impact for not just humanity as a whole, for nature as a whole. This is this thing that, you know, the interconnectedness of all life. The adverse impact is not just localized to that given territory. It can have huge indirect adverse consequences that can play out many, many years later. So it's understanding also that, you know, it comes with consequences. Cause harm here, it has unknown consequences elsewhere as well. Yeah, absolutely. Stina.
Okay, I actually read on, I didn't have the time to speak with you about it, Charles, but I read on Wikipedia that you're coming out with a new book these days. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
It's just out.
True?
It just came out a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've been talking about is based on that book, really. But it's about the transition in our story of the world and our story of the self, and what that means politically, what that means personally, how to be a change agent and a story disruptor, how many of us, much of the time, are trapped in old stories without even knowing that we are, and in old habits. Touches on themes of hope and despair, naivete, evil, pleasure, pain, initiation. All the chapters are one word. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a lot more, it's not really research-based so much. It's more, you know, here's what Charles thinks. And I'm kind of amazed that people are actually reading it.
Okay, I'm going to give the microphone to you. I just want to say, because I know some people have to go and so on. Charles and Polly, they're giving this lecture as a gift to us, actually. They're not asking anything to have this, to give this lecture. But we're thinking that to give a gift back to them, if you want to do that, we actually arranged a bowl over there. So if you want to support their work, consider giving a gift. It's totally up to you. They're giving a gift to us, and if you want, you can give a gift back.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, wait for the microphone.
I'm very pleased to have you here. You two are beautiful people, and I very much like your ideas and your work. I'm honored to be your public. So, but as I see it, the world has two problems: ignorance and bad will. Bad will in destroying the world, as you know it in Syria, for example, or Iraq, or other places. And when it comes to war, or when it comes to economical destruction, or environmental destruction, or all kind of things, is to do with will. So how to prevent, how to, as you said something about giving the spark, because the ignorant people, they need the spark, they need something in their heart, they need something to really like, yes, let's do it different way, let's do something nice instead of just following in these hierarchies. So, but they are on top, the ones in control, which has bad will. How can we prevent their bad will to happen? How can we give them the spark? What do you think about that?
Well, actually, there's a company, there's an NGO, a charity in Scotland that what they do is they go into companies and they take them out of the office, they take them up a mountain, and they get them talking about nature and experiencing it. And they have, these CEOs and directors have profound, connection with the land, and they go back into their offices and what have you. And within 2-3 months, half of them have resigned. So here they are trying to instill a new way of engaging with the earth. And they all say, I can't stand it any longer. I've got to go. I've got to get out of this system. So actually the intent of this charitable organisation was not to disrupt the workplace and get rid of them all. Say, now that you've found nature, go home. It was to try to instill within the companies a different narrative, a different way of engaging with life, a place of deep care. But it seems that the two could not play out together. So these big companies are so stuck in a different story that even by bringing in what I think Charles would call a new story, what it means is those who take the new story find themselves saying, I don't want the old story anymore. I want a better life. So they walk away. They don't want to stay within it, rather than saying, okay, we stay, we change within. So maybe this is what it's about. Maybe we're going to have more and more people leaving these companies and saying, I'm going to do permaculture instead.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to I mean, the story of the company is embedded in larger stories of the economy, and it's very difficult to change that one thing without changing everything else that it's connected to. But I would say, as far as the spark, I would say just look within and what gave you the spark. And it's probably something like what Polly described, an experience of beauty or grief or both in nature maybe that made you into an environmentalist. It wasn't because somebody confronted you with persuasive evidence and logic and demolished your intellectual position. It was probably an experience. So I'd say to give people the spark, give them an experience, either directly or maybe through stories.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, I'm a girl, and I see no girls are raising their hands, so I keep on.
Is there a lady out there who would
Yeah.
like to ask a question? Now is your choice, your chance. Nobody? Yes. Here we have Stina at the front.
I didn't get a lot of time to make my question, so I have to think a little bit. I thought about the way you talked about altruism. I think that's for me that's a key, the key word, because as you told, we have to, or we used to look at altruism as something that is that you are kind of silly or dumb if you are altruist. But I had this very big experience in my own life. 20 years ago, I had a severe handicapped child that I had to take care of. And after a few years with a lot of grief, I just changed my way at looking at the everyday work with him, and I saw that that work gave me it was a gift. It was because it changed my way of thinking, not only of him but all the world, all the beauty, everything. But I see that we need to make a different, what's the English word, definition of the word altruism, and not kind of say that altruists are dumb nurses that are just working and get bad paid and everything. And I also think that the problem with the money, everything is about the money. Even when I worked with my son, well, we live in Norway, so I got some paid, but if I had done my work outside the home, I would be maybe 4 times as rich. So it's a lot about the money. So how can we do this? How can we make the world look at the altruistic human being as the best human being, and how can we fix this, that everything is about the money?
Well, I think that your story is an example of what loosens people from the hold of money. You know, you have a beautiful story about taking care of a handicapped child and deciding that that was going to be what's important to you, and that you'd be okay if you did that, if you devoted yourself to this service. And here you are now, and you are okay. And not only that, you're saying that you became richer in so many ways from doing that. And when people hear your story, they think, yeah, I can do that too. There's something that's calling to me too. So I think that sharing our stories, from the scarcity side of the river, it looks really scary over there. You know, like for example, like if I mean, this is how I do these events. You know, like it's a gift. Now, so before I'd be like, well, if I don't charge people to come to my events, then, you know, how can I survive? You know, will I be okay? But actually what happens, and I get letters from this all the time, people write to me emails, you know, when you let go, then magic happens. I get letters. I got a letter from a guy in Denmark. He said, like, I read your book and I decided I was going to give away all my money. And like, actually, my book doesn't say give away all your money, but it says to trust the feeling of rightness. In any moment, what's the right gift? But anyway, this guy, what was right for him is he gave away all his money. He said, you would not believe the magic and the wealth that have come into my life ever since I did this. I got a letter from another guy. He's a reverse Batman. Every night, he loads up his Batmobile, his car, with food, blankets, and he just drives around Cleveland, Ohio, which is a very depressed city, and he just gives food and blankets and sleeping bags to homeless people and gives them rides, just drives them around, and he just does that all night. And his wife got upset with him. Said, you're spending all your money, we're not having any savings. You're squandering our wealth doing this. So he eventually began to pretend that he was going out and getting drunk. And that was more acceptable because of the fear. But yeah, so like sharing these stories. I'll share one more story. I've heard a few stories like this. A woman was in my seminar and she said she just got back from Afghanistan. She had been a soldier there and now she went back as a civilian, and she visited a village, and she said, this is the poorest village I've ever seen in my life. The people there have nothing. Tiny houses, dirt floors, not even enough food. But when I went there, they shared everything they had with me. They brought out their tea to share with the guest, and this is the only thing that they had to share. They shared their tea. They were the most generous people I've ever met, and they were the happiest too. They were always smiling. I never see people this happy in America. She said it changed my understanding of what happy is. Like there's a whole new happy that I didn't even know existed that I saw there. And I heard that story, I thought, as I've had this thought many times, why are these people richer than I am? Wealth is the freedom to be generous. And they have that. And why don't we have that? And I guess I'm diverging off your question, but the experience of connection is what makes us rich. And if you give that experience to people, even by telling your story, then they will become rich and they'll be more free to give as well.
I do know one thing. I get asked for if I can sell people cocaine 5 times a day. So I don't have any, by the way. Anyway, thank you.
Can I tell a story about that, actually?
It's a good story.
I know this guy in Oakland. His name is Pancho. And he gets arrested sometimes. He's like one of the most positive, friendly people I've ever met. Hardcore activist, peace activist. He goes to, he went to Occupy Oakland and he would just be sitting there meditating, and the police would come and, push him around and take him to jail and things like that. But he's always happy to meet every single person, even if it's a policeman. So there's one story that I read about him where he's on a hunger strike against nuclear weapons development, and the police come and they start beating. There's him and 9 other hunger strikers, and he's a little guy. They pick him up, they throw him onto the concrete, they roughly handcuffed him, and he looks at the policeman and he's like, "Hey, you've got a Mexican name, do you like Mexican food?" And the policeman's like, yeah. He says, "Well, how about this? After this is all over, I want to break my fast with you." and like, he's not being manipulative. He's like actually like interested in this human being. When he goes to jail, like, he'll say things to the jailer. He'll be like, to the guards, he'll be like, brother, your soul is too beautiful to be doing this work. And he'll say it and he'll mean it. Like the person will receive it, he'll mean it. And another story, I've told it already today, but I'll tell it again. He lives in a, quote, bad neighborhood. And so he's out there and he's being mugged. He's being robbed by an armed gang. And, there they are, like they've got the gun, they've got the knife, and then just at that moment, a police car pulls up. Lights flashing, sirens blaring. So the gang runs. And Pancho runs with them. So they get away. They get away, and they're like, what are you doing with us? Don't you understand? We were trying to rob you, And Pancho says, no, you're my people, not the police. So they're like, okay, whatever. But he keeps following them around. And then they're like, what do we have to do to get rid of you? And he says, you have to shake my hand. So he shakes hands with every single member of the gang. And over time, he is completely changing that neighborhood into a peace neighborhood. And he says it'll take 10 years to do it, because it's a place. There's gunshots. Like people are afraid for their children. But what he's doing is he's changing the story that those people are living in. He's changing the story of the police that has a category for the, radical activist, or the scruffy-looking drug dealer, or the this or the that or the that. And he's acting in a way that doesn't fit into their categories. Or with that gang, he's like, they, expect either he'll be afraid or he'll, try to get revenge or whatever, but he's like friendly, and that's, like, you may not have the power to stop a policeman from putting you in jail, but you have the power of how you see that human being. And I think, as we get more and more deeply grounded in the perception of oneness, of knowing that if I were that policeman, I would be doing this too. Because we're not separate. You're the same being as I am, looking from different eyes. The more we're grounded and plugged into that perception, the more natural it is to be really curious about every person, especially if it's an intense interaction. Whoa, what's bringing us into this intimate moment where you are beating me up? And then you have incredible power to change any situation.
Okay. Polly, I know that you've been in Norway now for some time, a couple of months or something. Would you share some of the stories you've been part of creating or been part of here in Norway? Why you're here?
Well, I'm here as the Arne Næss professor at Oslo University, which is an honorary position. I'm not an academic, so that's great. It means I don't have to mark essays. I'm very happy about that. But it does mean I get to inspire students and to really bring in big ideas. And I seed a different type of conversation. And I'm very interested in that, how we change the narrative around us, how we look to what is flourishing, well, maybe not flourishing, but that's in the margins, but that can and will flourish, in Charles's words, in a more beautiful world. I see it as a post-Ecocide era. Here I am saying that here's a law we can put in place that will take us to a world where we no longer commit ecocide. But it's more than that. I'm speaking to everyone and anyone everywhere I go about the law of ecocide. So I've been speaking to government ministers, I've been speaking to NGOs, I've been speaking with transition town people, permaculturalists. I was speaking at the Dow's Centre with the Quakers, with everyone and anyone in between. I kind of, from the moment I wake up, I have breakfast meetings. I'm then maybe up in the university for a while, having lunch with students, doing some stuff up there, then off meeting people in the afternoon, and then maybe speaking in the evening. So I'm busy seeding a really big idea that I believe whose time has come. And I'm particularly interested, and one of the reasons why I said yes to coming up for 2 months to be here in Norway was to have the opportunity to really meet people. There's nothing like actually, seeing someone eye to eye, sitting down, having coffee, and sharing big ideas and big dreams for a better world. And my wish is for to end all ecocide, and I know it can be done legally. So there is a path there, and this is something that really is calling upon leaders to dare to be great. And this actually takes me to the one thing that I really am doing in my own life, and that I'm seeding here as well. I realized if I'm going to be talking to leaders and calling on them to stand up and speak up for a law that puts people and planet first, so that really is calling on a certain greatness. That's stepping away from the business as usual political world of safetyness, of, this will give us a nice little result over here. We're really talking about something that's the quantum leap rather than just the small steps. That if I was to be calling upon people to stand up and speak out and dare to be great in this, because it really is about greatness and leadership, then maybe I need to dare to be great too. And what does that mean? What does it mean if I challenge myself to dare to be great, to be in service to something greater than the self? I'm not talking about being, next year's pop idol. Besides, I can't sing. But this is really about what does it mean? What does greatness mean, and the greatness of our times? Now more than ever, I really believe that the earth is calling. It's a calling to arms. It's calling upon us to stand up and speak out as a voice for the earth. And that challenges us. That challenges us to step out of our comfort zone. But Charles, you said this. It's when we step out of our comfort zone, that's where magic happens, and it really does. I know that. I've experienced it. But also it's the greatness in the small moments, the quiet moments, the time you spend, with your child that's severely handicapped. That's greatness in my eyes. And Charles has given examples of that as well. And this ripple effect, again, when we challenge ourselves in that realm and start a deeper inquiry, and of course I'm wearing the Arnie Ness hat here. I'm following in the footsteps of someone who was truly great, and who was challenging an existing system, and who was calling upon each and every one of us to take a deeper inquiry into what is it that allows us to engage with life itself. What happens when we have that deeper inquiry? Well, when you start to challenge yourself to dare to be great, it starts flushing out all the stuff you don't want to look at. And part of daring to be great is to face that shadow self within our own selves. So this is a process of inner discovery for me. And of course, the challenges come here in Norway as well as many places. But one story that I've really learned from being here is the story of dugnad, which I think is wonderful, because the spirit of dugnad is to be in service. We call it voluntary service now, but everyone coming together, a community coming together from a place of caring, deep caring and sharing. So that's deeply embedded in the culture here. And in a way, it's about shining a light on something magical like that and saying, let's bring that back to the fore again. That's a jolly good idea. I really like it. Dugnad. Yeah, I'm going to use that word a lot.
Very nice words, Polly. I think now we should try to set an end. I see there's one more question that Harald wants to ask, so we'll let him ask that.
Thank you. Yes. You were talking about big corporations and the ecocide that they're doing, and to end that with a new law.
Yeah.
But I mean, they earn money on the stuff that they're doing, the oil sands and pumping of oil and Fukushima. It's great danger, but they create jobs and stuff. What are we going to do when people don't have jobs?
Well, here's the thing. There's a natural presumption there, which seems to come up time and time again, that a law of ecocide will stop jobs. Actually, it's going to create a huge amount of jobs. If you're thinking about shifting business from dangerous industrial activity to innovation in the other direction, we're going to need to skill up an awful lot of people. We're going to be looking at a whole new way of doing things. It's about decentralizing energy. I mean, you know, there's people already talking about how we can create energy for free. Well, actually, I think that's fantastic. We should be shining a spotlight on that. We should be tasking our universities and research centres and institutions to be engaging on that. And this is a law that will do that. So this is not about closing down Statoil. This is actually creating the legal framework to enable Statoil to turn into Stat Renewables by law. Because at the moment, they can't actually do that within the existing legal structure. It's not financially viable for them to do that. It's not being prioritised by law, and it's not being invested in. So this is also about creating long-term investment signals as well into the innovation in the other direction. I think this will trigger the green economy. In a very big way. So this is about creating resilient economies as well, but economies that are putting the interests of people and planet first. So you're looking at, in a way, it's a shift from prioritising money, global economy, to prioritising the global commons, the health and well-being of people and planet. And it's about the shift of the flow of money. It's not about doing away with money altogether, but it's the flow. Where is it going at the moment? Well, it's flowing into dangerous industrial activity, because that's where you make your most of your profit. That's low risk, that's established, it's well-established mechanism, well-oiled wheels turning there. But when you turn off the tap of the flow of money to dangerous industrial activity, what you do is you open up, quite literally, the floodgates for money to flow into the innovation in the other direction.
Can I ask one last question? Very last question. I mean, isn't the profit motive, I mean, no matter how many laws you are making, isn't the profit motive the devastating motive all the time? I mean, wouldn't the moneyless economy, like a gift economy, a resource-based economy or something like that, where we cooperate instead of compete, be better for everyone?
Yeah, no, I really agree, I agree. And you know, someone once said, how do you change an old broom into a new broom? Well, it's dead easy. First of all, you take off the head and you put on a new head. Then second, you take off the body and you put on a new body, and hey, you've got a whole new broom. Well, it's a bit like that, you know. So first of all, you change the laws here, you know, and then you change the law there, and then by the end of it, you know, you're in a completely different place. So there's the transitioning, there's the bridging to get there. And that's about putting in place overriding laws that put the intrinsic values of people and planet first. Because actually what happens is you start fundamentally shifting the normative, and it paves the way for something far deeper to emerge after that. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Polly.
No,
thank you so much, Charles. This has been a pleasure. We're so happy that you could come here and share these words with us. Very insightful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Stina.
This has been wonderful.
I actually had a plan, and that was, I know some of your values, and I wanted to get you a gift. My plan was to make something homemade, and something like, for example, handmade mittens. But I was so busy organizing this thing and other lectures that we have been doing, so I never got to do it. So unfortunately, you get something else. But yeah, it's a bit about Norway, and yeah, open it and you can see.
Oh,
there you go.
Thank you. Okay.
Not everything goes as you plan.
Oh, very nice. Thank you very much.
I love you.
Beautiful.
I know you love nature, and here you can see a lot of pictures from the nature.
Oh, this is wonderful. And this is all the places I'm not going to have time to get to. Yeah. Which I have to come back for. Thank you. And what's this?
Oh yeah, that's I don't know what you call it. It's
this is for night time.
It's for the night time, yeah, and it has a pattern like the mittens we're supposed to have.
This is Marius design. Yeah, wonderful. And oh, it's an elk. Oh, that's great. My brother has young kids, and they're really excited I'm up here because they're convinced I'm going to meet Santa Claus and lots of reindeer. And I have to take photographs of every elk and reindeer I meet, but I'm not meeting any. So I'm going to take photos of that.
Actually, I didn't see that, but someone told me it was actually a troll. Yeah.
That's a troll. Yeah. It's a troll's nose with an elk on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And is there anything we can do to help you?
Yes. Well, lots, actually. One of the things that really helps me hugely is the visibility of support for a law of ecocide. What I'm doing is I'm calling for an amendment to what is possibly the most important legal document we have in the world, the Rome Statute, and that sets out the existing international crimes, including genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I'm saying that there's a missing fifth crime, that's ecocide. Now, to have that amended is actually relatively simple, amazingly. We don't have to create a whole new treaty or convention to do this, or protocol. It's just an amendment. And all that needs is one head of state to stand up and speak out, to call for it, and it has to be tabled. And then it's a matter of accruing 81 signatories, member states' signatories to it. So I'm really calling on heads of state, or a head of state, or a group of them, to stand up and call for this. But the biggest problem is showing that there is a body of public support for it, a public mandate to act. There's a terrible fear that the huge weight of corporate lobbying will come down very, very fast. So on the website you'll find Wish 20, and it is my wish by 2020 that we have a law of ecocide fully in place, and every government in the world has received a concept paper setting out the timeline to get there. Last year I legally advised 54 governments, or their legal advisors and ambassadors. And so what we're doing is, on that map, is we're showing more and more people are engaging on this. It makes it visible. It helps those governments to see, oh, there is a public engagement here. I mean, there is a huge engagement, but it's not visible. So it's about bringing that up and making it visible, and seeding it as a big idea whose time has come. So anyone you think should know about this, please do share this as a big idea. And if it's before the 30th of November, I'm going to be bankrupt in coffee. So anyone who wants to come for a coffee or suggest someone I should meet, please do put them my way. Details are on the websites. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.